We lived in fear, I mean real fear. And I swear to you, you cannot imagine how terrifying that woman was. We were sitting by the stream, smoking, just a few of us trying to steal a quiet moment in the middle of hell. Then, oh. Alex, the kid who had only been in Vietnam for 2 weeks, sitting right next to me, dropped. A bullet ripped through his head and his brain sprayed across the grass. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone. We all hit the ground, scrambling for cover, searching the treeline for the Viet Cong sniper. But then, silence. Nothing. Just the sound of the jungle, as if nothing had happened. And in that silence we all thought the same name. I bet every single one of us did. Apache. The woman. The ghost. The most terrifying sniper the Viet Cong had. You see, death was no stranger to us. By that point in the war, we had seen enough bodies to last a lifetime. But there was something different about this. It wasn't just a bullet. It wasn't just another casualty. It carried a signature, a shadow that hung over every kill. We didn't even have to see her to feel her presence. That was her power. She wasn't just a sniper. She was a specter, a phantom moving through the jungle, and every one of us knew that if she wanted you, you were already dead. I still remember the smell of the jungle that day, the way the air clung to your skin like a wet blanket. Sweat and gun oil, smoke from half-burned cigarettes, the stench of fear, it all mixed into something I can still taste if I close my eyes. And Alex's blood, bright against the dark mud, steaming in the heat. I never forgot that. We all looked at each other, our faces pale beneath the grime, and no one said a word. We didn't have to. We all knew what had just happened. Fear has a way of sticking to you. It seeps into your bones, sits in your stomach. And the fear of her, Apache, was like nothing else. We had all heard the stories, the whispers passed from unit to unit. They said she was of mixed blood, part French, part Vietnamese. They said she had been fighting since she was a teenager, that she had learned to shoot before she could even read. But it wasn't her marksmanship alone that made her a legend. It was what she did when she caught someone alive. Torture. Mutilation. Things so cruel that even the Viet Cong themselves were said to be afraid of her. Now, I don't know how many of those stories were true, and I don't think it mattered. When you are living in the jungle, half-starved, half-mad, it doesn't take much to turn rumor into reality. Every time we found a body, cut open, mutilated, eyes missing, well, those whispers became screams in our heads. And no matter where we went, no matter how quiet the night, it felt like she was watching. Waiting. I remember lying in my cot at night, staring up at the canvas of the tent, listening to the jungle. Every rustle, every insect buzz, every snap of a twig could be her. Sometimes I would wake up drenched in sweat, clutching my rifle, convinced she was out there with her scope trained on me. That's what she did to us. She broke us before she even fired a shot. Alex's death wasn't the first, and it sure as hell wasn't the last. But it was the one that made it real for me. He had been sitting right there, so close I could feel the heat of his cigarette. And then he was gone. Just gone. I don't even remember what I said or if I said anything at all. But inside something changed. I knew then that Apache wasn't just some story. She was real. And she was hunting us. There was a kind of silence that followed her kills. Not just the jungle silence, but the silence inside us. Conversation stopped. Laughter died. The younger Marines looked at the ground, afraid to meet each other's eyes. Because we all knew the same thing, any one of us could be next. And that kind of fear eats away at you. It gnaws at your courage, it makes you doubt yourself. It makes you wonder why the hell you're even here in the first place. But the thing about soldiers is, we keep moving. Fear or no fear, we keep moving. We patrol, we dig in, we smoke, we laugh when we can. But deep down, we all carried her shadow with us. And in those days on Hill 55, that shadow felt heavier than the jungle itself. I was 21 years old then. Just a kid, though I didn't think so at the time. I thought I knew what war was. I thought I understood death, understood courage, understood what it meant to fight. But Apache taught me otherwise. She taught all of us otherwise. War wasn't about battles and medals and glory. War was about nights spent listening to screams you couldn't stop, mornings spent counting empty bunks, and afternoons like that one by the stream, when life ended with a single crack of a rifle. Sometimes I think about Alex. He was just a boy. He had freckles and he talked about his mom's cooking like it was the greatest thing on earth. He carried a picture of his high school sweetheart in his breast pocket. And in an instant he was gone. His girl back home never got to say goodbye. His mom never got to hold him again. And me? I never stopped hearing the sound of his skull cracking open. That's what war does. It takes boys and turns them into names on a wall. And Apache, she made sure we never forgot that. She wasn't just a soldier. She was fear made flesh. And sitting here now, all these years later, I can still feel it like she's out there, somewhere in the shadows. I don't know if you can understand what it's like to live like that. To live knowing that death has a face and it's a woman's face. To live knowing that every step, every breath could be your last. It changes you. It hardens you. But it also breaks something inside. And I don't think it ever heals. That day by the stream was just the beginning of the story I'm about to tell you. The story of Apache. The woman who hunted us and nearly broke us. And the man who finally hunted her back, Carlos Hathcock. Hill 55 was supposed to be safe. That's what they told us anyway. 8 miles from Da Nang, on high ground with sandbags and wire and watchtowers, we were meant to feel secure there. But the truth is Hill 55 was never safe. Not for a single minute. The jungle wrapped around it like a noose and the heat never let up. The air was thick and wet and no matter how much you wiped your skin, the sweat clung to you like glue. Mosquitoes swarmed day and night, biting through the thin fabric of our fatigues, buzzing in our ears as we tried to sleep. At night the rats came, bold as thieves, crawling over boots and packs, gnawing at anything that smelled of food. Sometimes you woke up with one staring at you, its eyes glowing in the dark. We tried to laugh about it, called them our little mascots, but deep down we hated them. Just one more reminder that the jungle owned us. Then there were the snakes. Green pit vipers coiled on branches above the trails, cobras slithering through the grass. I remember a kid named Miller nearly lost his hand when he reached into a hole looking for a dropped magazine. The jungle punished carelessness. It punished weakness. And Hill 55 sat right in the middle of it. But the worst part wasn't the snakes or the heat or the damn mosquitoes. It was the waiting. Every night, as darkness closed in, the fear grew heavier. We took turns on watch, rifles ready, eyes straining into the black. And almost every night, somewhere along the perimeter, a shot would crack. Sometimes it was just one. Sometimes two. A man would drop, and before anyone could react, silence would return. Always silence. No movement in the trees, no muzzle flash. Just a body lying in the dirt. That's when we started whispering about her. Apache. At first, it was just a name passed around like a bad joke. Some said she was a ghost. Others swore she was a woman sniper trained by the Russians. Nobody really knew. But the bodies piling up gave her life. The precision, the single shots through the head or chest, the way she vanished without a trace. It wasn't random. It was her. And every time someone died, the legend grew. We tried to fight the fear. Cigarettes, cheap whiskey from the PX, dark jokes that made us laugh too loud. But the nights dragged on and the body count rose and it wore us down. You could see it in the younger Marines especially. Their eyes got hollow. Some flinched at every sound. Some begged to be transferred. Some stopped sleeping altogether, too afraid of not waking up. And the rest of us, we just learned to live with it, though living might not be the right word. It was more like existing, waiting for our turn. I remember one night in particular. The moon was high, lighting up the wire, and the air was so still you could hear every insect in the grass. We were smoking, trying to stay awake, when suddenly, crack. A single shot. I froze. A kid named Jensen, barely 19, crumpled forward on the sandbags. The bullet had gone clean through his temple. He didn't even make a sound. Just fell like a puppet with its strings cut. And then, silence again. Always silence. We searched, we fired blindly into the tree-line, tracers lighting up the night. Nothing. By the time the echoes died, we knew she was already gone. It was then I realized something. She wasn't just picking us off at random. She was choosing her moments. Making sure we never felt safe, never let our guard down. She was patient, deliberate, and worse than that, she was inside our heads. And I'll tell you something, that's how you win a war. Not with bombs, not with body counts, but by breaking men from the inside. By making them so afraid they can't think straight, can't trust the quiet, can't even look at each other without wondering who will be next. Sleep became a luxury on Hill 55. We tried, God knows we tried, but every time the jungle went quiet, our minds raced. You'd lie there, staring at the roof of your hooch, listening for footsteps that weren't there. The moment your eyes closed, you imagined the crosshairs lining up on your skull. Some of the guys started refusing to sleep at all. They'd sit up all night, chain smoking, their hands trembling, rifles across their laps. I watched good men unravel in those weeks. Kids really? 19, 20 years old. They came in full of bravado, talking about how the war would be over before Christmas, how they'd go home heroes. But after a few nights under Apache's shadow, they stopped talking. Their jokes dried up. Their faces hollowed out. It wasn't the firefights that broke them, it was the waiting. The invisible enemy. The knowledge that you could die without ever seeing who pulled the trigger. Some turned to the bottle. We had a stash of cheap whiskey traded from supply clerks and it disappeared fast. Others smoked through carton after carton of cigarettes. Anything to keep the nerves steady, anything to fill the silence. But the whiskey only made the fear louder, and the cigarettes only gave you more time to stare at the dark, wide-eyed and sleepless. One night, I remember hearing Johnson muttering to himself, rocking back and forth on his cot. He kept whispering, she's out there, she's watching. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking so bad he could barely hold his rifle. We tried to calm him down, but what could we say? We believed it too. She was out there. She was always out there. The worst part wasn't the death. Death you could understand. Death you could bury, mourn, salute. The worst part was the precision. Clean shots. A man hit square through the forehead while on guard duty, 600 yards out. Another dropped while taking a piss at the edge of camp, the bullet catching him in the chest like someone had been watching through a scope all night. It didn't feel random. It felt personal. Like she was choosing her targets carefully, one at a time, to remind us that nowhere was safe. And the effect was devastating. Morale rotted. Some guys stopped writing letters home. They didn't want to admit how scared they were. Others wrote too many letters, scribbling like mad, as if they needed to say everything before their turn came. The young replacements, fresh off the plane, looked at us like we were already ghosts. And maybe we were. There were times I thought I'd crack too. Nights when I'd lie awake, listening to the jungle breathe, convinced I could hear her moving out there. I'd picture her face, though I'd never seen it, sharp, cold, almost calm. The stories said she was small, barely 100 pounds. But in our minds she was a giant. A shadow that loomed over the whole damn hill. One morning, after another body was brought in, Captain Land said something that stuck with me. He stood over the stretcher, staring down at the pale face of a Marine who had been alive less than 12 hours ago, and he muttered, "She's not just killing bodies. She's killing our spirit." And he was right. That was the weapon she carried, more powerful than her rifle. She made us question everything, our training, our leadership, our chances of survival. She made us doubt the sun would rise. And once a soldier starts doubting, once the spirit cracks, you don't need bullets to win the war. The story started small, like whispers in the dark. One guy swore he heard from an ARVN scout that she was half French, half Vietnamese, a child of two worlds who had turned her anger against us. Another said she was beautiful, too beautiful for war. That she lured men with her eyes, only to torture them after capture. The tales multiplied with every night we sat around the dim light of a cigarette, waiting for the next shot to come. Someone claimed she kept trophies. eyelids, that she cut them from the men she captured, left them alive, unable to close their eyes, forced to stare at the world until they screamed themselves into madness. I don't know if that was true. God, I hope it wasn't. But when you're out there in the jungle, sweating in the dark, listening to every sound with your finger on the trigger, the line between rumor and truth disappears. We never saw her face, but in our minds, we painted it 1,000 times. Some imagined a demon. Others pictured a young woman with cold eyes and a rifle steadier than her breath. I tried not to think about it at all, but the more I pushed it away, the stronger it came back. Because every time someone fell, we blamed her. Even if it was a random firefight, even if it was an ambush that could have been set by anyone, our minds went straight to Apache. It was strange how the legend became larger than the war itself. I would look at my buddies, men made of flesh and blood, scared and tired like me, and somehow she felt more real than they did. That's the power fear has over men. It grows in the dark, feeds on silence, and before long it shapes the world around you. Fear has a way of making legends feel more real than the men standing next to you. And that's what she became to us. Not just a sniper. Not just an enemy soldier. But a legend of the kind that makes you doubt your own senses. Every rustle in the grass, every shadow in the tree line, we thought it was her. Every gunshot in the distance, we were sure it was her. She was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The young ones were hit the hardest. I could see it in their faces, the way their eyes darted around camp. They'd jump at shadows, fingers twitching on their rifles, whispering about her in voices they thought nobody else could hear. The fear spread like smoke, seeping into every corner of Hill 55. It got to the point where even the veterans started looking twice at the darkness. You couldn't help it. Out there, the night felt alive, and you never knew if Apache was looking back. The rumors twisted themselves into nightmares. Every time we lost a man, the details got darker. Some said she carved her initials into the bodies. Others swore she laughed while men begged for their lives. None of us knew what was real. The only truth we had was the silence after the shot, the body cooling in the dirt, and the sick feeling in our guts that it was her again. One evening after a long patrol, we sat in the mess tent trying to eat canned beans. Nobody said much. Then a young Marine, barely 18, broke the silence. He whispered, "They say she cuts them apart piece by piece just to watch." His voice shook, his spoon rattling in his hand. Nobody corrected him. Nobody told him to shut up. Because deep down we were afraid it might be true. That's how the stories worked. They fed on silence. On the spaces between gunshots. On the long nights when we stared at the tree line and prayed not to be next. The less we knew, the more our minds filled in the blanks. And fear always paints in darker colors than reality. I remember lying on my back one night, staring up at the stars, and realizing I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Was she truly half French, half Vietnamese? Did she really keep trophies? Or were we creating a monster out of the shadows because it was easier to believe in one terrible figure than in the randomness of war? I didn't know. Maybe I still don't. But the fear was real. That much I can swear to. It was in every nervous glance, every twitching hand, every jump at the sound of a snapping twig. We stopped trusting the quiet. We stopped trusting the night. Some of us even stopped trusting each other. Because once you believe there's a ghost in the jungle, every shadow becomes her. The jungle itself seemed to conspire with the legend. The way the mist rolled in at dawn, the way branches shifted in the wind, the way the insects went silent right before a shot rang out. It all fed the myth. And after a while, it didn't matter if Apache was one woman or 100. The legend had become its own weapon, stronger than any rifle. I could feel it inside me too. I'd walk the perimeter at night, my rifle heavy in my hands, and I'd catch myself staring into the dark, half expecting to see her eyes staring back. Not just an enemy, not just a soldier, but something else. Something bigger than flesh and blood. And that's how fear works. It crawls inside your head, settles in your chest, and makes you see things that may not even be there. It blurs the line between rumor and truth until they're the same. And on Hill 55, under Apache's shadow, that line vanished completely. I remember the first time I saw him. Carlos Hathcock. To us, he was already a name whispered with a kind of reverence. Stories had drifted down the line about a sniper who could wait for days without moving, a man who could reach out across half a mile and end a life with a single squeeze of the trigger. But stories were one thing. Seeing him walk into Hill 55 was something else entirely. He didn't arrive like the rest of us, sweating, nervous, shifting our gear around. Hathcock moved with a quietness that felt unnatural, like he carried his own silence with him. Tall, lean, his face weathered but calm, his eyes. Those eyes didn't blink the way ours did. They were steady, pale, like glass that had seen too much light and too much dark. The kind of eyes that looked through you, not at you. And then there was the rifle. His Winchester Model 70. It wasn't just a weapon to him, it was part of him. You could see it in the way his hand rested on the stock, casual but intimate, the way a man might hold the hand of someone he'd known his whole life. It wasn't a tool. It was an extension of his body. He didn't talk much. A nod here, a short word there. While we were restless, filling the air with chatter to keep the fear away, he stayed quiet. He listened. He watched. And strangely, that silence didn't unsettle us. It steadied us. Because if a man like him could be calm in this hell, then maybe we could too. The young Marines felt it right away. They stopped fidgeting when he was around. They sat straighter. They didn't even realize they were doing it. It was like Hathcock carried a gravity that pulled all of us into line. You didn't want to embarrass yourself around him, not because he demanded respect, but because he embodied it. There was something different about him. Something not entirely human, if I'm honest. Most of us carried fear in our shoulders, in our eyes, in our voices when we spoke. Hathcock didn't. He carried patience like it was a physical weight, and inside that patience was death. He wasn't just a man with a rifle. He was the space between breaths, the stillness before a storm. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something I hadn't felt since I landed in Vietnam. I felt hope. Not much. Just a flicker. But when I looked at him standing there, silent, his hand resting on that Winchester, I thought to myself, if anyone could hunt a ghost, it was Hathcock. The order came down not long after Hathcock arrived. By then, the fear had reached a breaking point. Men were snapping, discipline was crumbling, and every night seemed to claim another Marine. It wasn't just about Apache's bullets anymore. It was about her shadow, the way it crawled into our heads and settled in our bones. Command knew something had to be done. I remember the meeting like it was yesterday. We gathered inside the command tent, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the stench of sweat. A single lantern swung overhead, throwing restless shadows across the canvas walls. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson leaned over a map spread out across the table, his finger tapping the paper so hard it sounded like a drumbeat. Every tap was a reminder. Another man dead, another night stolen. His voice was tight, hoarse from too many sleepless nights. Gentlemen, this cannot continue. She's not just killing our men. She's breaking them. Hill 55 won't hold if this keeps up. He looked at Land, then at Hathcock, who stood silently at the edge of the table. The order is clear. Apache must be eliminated. A heavy silence followed. Nobody needed to say it out loud. We all knew what was being asked. This wasn't a patrol. This wasn't an ambush. This was a manhunt. Two hunters tracking a ghost through the jungle. Land leaned in, studying the map with a sharpness that matched Hathcock's stillness. She's been sighted along this ridge line, he said, drawing a circle with a pencil. South Vietnamese scouts say she moves camps every 2 to 3 days. Never stays in one spot too long. Smart. Careful. Hathcock didn't speak for a long moment. He just studied the lines of terrain, the elevation marks, the valleys and ridges. Finally he spoke, voice low and flat, the kind of voice that carried weight because it wasted no words. She'll favor high ground. Overwatch positions here, here and here. He tapped 3 points with the tip of his pencil. We set observation posts. Watch. Wait. Patterns will show themselves. The rest of us shifted uneasily. We weren't trained for patience like that. Days without movement, hours without sound. But Hathcock was. You could see it in the way he stared at the map, not as a piece of paper but as a living battlefield, every contour a potential kill zone. Davidson exhaled hard, rubbing his temples. You'll have what you need. Supplies. Ammunition. But this is your mission now. His eyes swept the room, finally landing on Hathcock again. And this. Before she ends us. After the meeting, we walked out into the humid night. The jungle buzzed with insects, the air heavy with the weight of what had just been decided. Hathcock and Land huddled together, already discussing approach routes, angles, fallback positions. They spoke in quiet, clipped tones, men who didn't waste energy on what-ifs. I hung back, listening, trying to absorb what I could. I remember Hathcock pointing at a section of the ridgeline visible even from camp, his silhouette outlined by the lantern light behind him. "She'll think she's hunting us," he murmured. "But the truth is, we'll be hunting her." And in that moment I realized something. This was no longer war. This was a hunt. It happened on a night when the air itself felt heavy, like the jungle was holding its breath. We had settled into that uneasy quiet that always came before dawn, the kind where every sound seemed sharpened. Then it started, faint at first like an echo too far to be real. But it grew. A scream. Long broken. Human. We froze. The camp went still as stone. Every man's head turned toward the dark tree line. The screams came again, cutting through the jungle like a knife. High-pitched, raw, the kind of sound that stripped the marrow from your bones. There was no mistaking what it was. One of ours. Men leapt to their feet. Rifles loaded. Boots thudding against the ground as anger boiled up. "We gotta go. We can't just sit here," a corporal shouted, voice cracking with fear as much as rage. But Hathcock was already moving, placing himself between the men and the perimeter. His hand rose, calm but firm. "No," he said flatly. "That's what she wants." The younger Marines didn't understand. How could they? Their buddy was out there, screaming for help, and we were just standing there listening. Some cursed under their breath, some cried openly, fists clenched helplessly. But Hathcock's eyes didn't waver. He knew. Apache wasn't just torturing Johnson, she was torturing us. I remember catching Ramirez's gaze. He was the one who came back. His uniform still stained with his own blood, a graze along his arm where the bullet had kissed him. He sat on the edge of his cot, pale, shaking, eyes wide like he was still trapped out there. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. His silence screamed as loud as Johnson's cries. Hour after hour, the jungle carried those sounds. Sometimes they stopped, leaving a silence more suffocating than the screams themselves. Then they started again, worse, weaker, each cry a reminder that Johnson was slipping further into whatever hell Apache had prepared for him. None of us slept. None of us even breathed right. It was like the whole company had been nailed to that sound. The night stretched forever. I can still hear it now, decades later. That scream doesn't fade. It doesn't die with the man. It plants itself in your head, in the cracks of your memory, and grows like a vine. When the sun finally rose, it brought no relief. The jungle sat quiet, too quiet, like it had swallowed Johnson whole. We tried to go about our routines, clean rifles, heat rations, check perimeter, but none of it mattered. We weren't ourselves anymore. We were ghosts, walking around camp with his screams rattling inside our skulls. That night, the jungle screamed with him and we all died a little. We set out before dawn, the air still damp with night. The jungle was heavy with mist, and every step felt like it might give us away. Hathcock led, Land close behind, and I brought up the rear. None of us spoke. Words felt dangerous, like even a whisper could betray our position. The trail was faint, almost invisible. A snapped twig here. A smear of blood on a leaf there. Ramirez had been right. Johnson had fought, or at least struggled, and in that struggle he left us a thread to follow. Hathcock moved with the focus of a predator. He didn't glance around nervously like the rest of us might. His eyes scanned the ground, the trees, the spaces between them, reading signs the way another man might read a book. I tried to match his stillness, but my heart was beating too loud, too fast. Every rustle of leaves made me flinch. Every bird that burst from a branch made my rifle jerk upward. The jungle had always been hostile, but now it felt alive, like it was watching us. Hours passed like that. Slow, grinding, our boots sinking into mud, mosquitoes buzzing around our faces, sweat soaking through our uniforms. My back ached from crouching low, my throat was dry, but I didn't dare stop. None of us did. The trail kept pulling us deeper, one faint sign at a time. Then we found it, the first undeniable mark. A cluster of cigarette butts, damp from the dew but still fresh. Hathcock crouched, pinched one between his fingers and held it up. "Russian make," he whispered. "She's been here." Land nodded grimly, scanning the tree-line. It wasn't just evidence. It was arrogance. They were getting sloppy, overconfident, and that gave us hope. We pressed on, moving slower now, senses sharpened. The jungle grew denser, vines thick as ropes hanging from the canopy, roots twisting underfoot. Every step was a calculation. Where to place your boot, how to shift your weight without snapping a branch. Sweat dripped into my eyes, stinging, but I didn't dare wipe it away. There was no sound but our breathing, and even that we tried to stifle. I could feel the fear stretching me thin, every nerve raw. At times it felt like the air itself was vibrating with tension. I caught myself thinking about Johnson's screams, about how the jungle had carried them, and wondered if Apache was listening to us now, waiting, smiling. Hathcock stopped suddenly, raising his fist. We froze. Ahead, a clearing. Not large, just a break in the undergrowth. In the center, the faint outline of where men had slept, flattened grass, charred wood from a small fire. Abandoned but not long ago. I could almost smell the smoke still clinging to the air. Land crouched, studying the ground. 2, maybe 3 days, he muttered. Hathcock shook his head. Less. A day, maybe less. His tone was certain. He stood, eyes narrowing on the trail leading out of the clearing. They're close. My stomach tightened. Close meant danger. Close meant one wrong move could end it. The jungle seemed to lean in around us, its silence pressing heavier on my ears. And in that moment, I realized the truth. We weren't chasing her anymore. We were walking straight into her hunting ground. The deeper we went, the more it felt like walking into the mouth of a beast. We kept moving deeper, the jungle swallowing us whole. Hours bled into one another, our bodies aching but our minds locked on the trail. Every so often Hathcock would stop, crouch low, and point to something none of us would have noticed. Scuffed earth, a branch bent at the wrong angle, a faint footprint half hidden by leaves. To him it was a language. To us it was salvation. The further we went, the clearer the signs became. Someone had grown careless. At one rest spot, we found a discarded ration tin, the label still clinging to the metal. At another, a piece of cloth snagged on thorns. These weren't the careful, ghost-like movements we'd been warned about. These were people who thought they had already broken their enemy's spirit. But the truth was, every step we took made my spirit feel heavier. My skin crawled with the thought that Apache knew we were coming. Maybe she was leaving this trail on purpose, breadcrumbs to draw us into her teeth. I kept glancing at the trees, half expecting to see the glint of her scope, the split-second flare of light before a bullet tore through me. The jungle felt alive in a way I'd never known. Cicadas screeched like alarms. Vines brushed against my face like hands trying to hold me back. Even the ground seemed to breathe, damp earth sucking at my boots with every step. My heart hammered so hard I worried they could hear it ahead of me. At midday we paused by a stream. Hathcock knelt by the water, his reflection broken by ripples. He dipped his fingers in, then pointed across to the far bank. They crossed here, he murmured. Land studied the mud, spotting the faint depressions of feet. Not long ago. We crossed silently, one by one, rifles raised, eyes darting to the canopy above. I could feel the tension winding tighter, like the jungle itself was a bowstring and we were the arrow being drawn back. Beyond the stream, the trail grew fresher. Cigarette ash. A footprint pressed deep into soft ground. The remains of a fire still warm when Hathcock sifted the ashes between his fingers. "Half a day," he said almost to himself. Land's jaw clenched. "We're close." And close meant any step could be our last. My nerves burned raw. My mouth tasted like metal. I thought of Johnson again, of the sound his voice had made tearing through the night, and I felt both dread and something darker, anger. We were deep in the beast's throat now, but part of me wanted to strike at its heart. The silence grew oppressive, the kind that made you hear things that weren't there. A snapping twig behind us. A whisper of movement in the leaves. Shadows that seemed to shift when you blinked. Every nerve screamed to fire, to run, to hide, but I forced myself to keep walking. Then Hathcock froze. His hand went up. We dropped instantly, hearts pounding. He pointed ahead toward a ridge line. Through the trees we caught the faintest glimpse. Shapes moving, 5 figures, shadows against the green. He didn't say it out loud, but we knew. We had found her trail and maybe even her. The jungle was no longer just watching us. It was closing its jaws. We had been following them for hours, every muscle stretched to its limit, every nerve raw. And then, through a gap in the trees, we finally saw them. A small group of figures moving along the ridge line, shadows against the late afternoon sun. 5 of them, moving with the kind of caution only fighters carried in their bones. Hathcock lifted his scope first, then passed me the binoculars. My hands trembled as I raised them, the glass bringing the figures into sharp relief. That was when I saw her. Apache. She was smaller than I expected. Thin, no more than 100 pounds, her frame almost delicate against the weight of the rifle slung across her shoulder. But her face, God, that face. Even at a distance, through grainy glass and dancing heat, it carried a stillness that chilled me. Calm. Cold. Like someone who had made peace with death, not just for herself but for everyone she touched. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. Around me the jungle buzzed, but in that moment none of it mattered. All I saw was her. The woman who had haunted our nights, stolen our brothers, broken our spirit. Flesh and blood, and yet unreal, like a phantom made visible. The group paused by a rocky outcrop. They spoke briefly, gestures passing between them. Then it happened. Apache stepped away. She moved toward a cluster of bushes, unslinging her rifle, and crouched down. From the way she shifted her stance, there was no mistaking it. She was relieving herself. Vulnerable. Unaware. I felt my chest tighten. My hands clutched the binoculars so hard my knuckles turned white. This was the chance. The one moment when the most terrifying woman in Vietnam was just a human being, as fragile as the rest of us. Beside me, Hathcock adjusted his Winchester. The quiet, practiced motions of a man who had done this 1,000 times. His breathing slowed, his finger resting gently against the trigger guard. Land whispered wind and distance, scribbling quick notes, but Hathcock barely needed them. He was already inside the shot. I realized then that I had stopped breathing. My lungs refused to move, my body frozen as if the smallest sound would shatter the moment. My ears rang with silence, my heartbeat pounding like artillery in my chest. Through the glass I watched her, crouched, distracted, utterly unaware of the eyes watching her from across the ridge. Time stretched, warped, bent itself around that one fragile instant. And then Hathcock exhaled. The world went silent, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. The trigger broke with the softest click, and then the rifle roared. The sound tore through the jungle, echoing off the ridges, a single thunderclap in a world that had gone silent. Through my binoculars I saw her body jolt. Apache stumbled backward, her hands clutching at her chest. For a heartbeat, she looked almost confused, as if she couldn't believe death had finally come for her. Then she collapsed onto the dirt, her rifle slipping from her shoulder. The group around her scattered, diving for cover, shouts lost in the distance. Hathcock didn't move, didn't flinch. He worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. Before the others had even vanished into the brush, the second shot cracked. Her body jerked once more, this time with finality. She lay still, eyes turned toward the fading light of the sky. The ghost of Hill 55 was no more. I lowered the binoculars, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. My throat was tight, my chest heavy. Around me, the jungle seemed to exhale, sounds of birds and insects trickling back as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. It was over. Just like that. Weeks of terror, nights filled with screams, days of watching shadows, ended in 2 pulls of a trigger. I should have felt nothing but relief, and in some way I did. The weight pressing down on us had lifted. For the first time, I believed we might sleep through the night without waking to another dead body. The monster was gone. But along with relief came something else. Emptiness. The kind that eats at your gut. I stared across the ridge and thought about how small she had looked through the glass, how fragile. She wasn't a demon. She wasn't a phantom. She was just a woman. Flesh, blood, bone. And she was gone forever. I felt the satisfaction too, I won't lie. A grim kind of triumph, the justice of knowing Johnson's screams hadn't been in vain, that the young men who had died with holes in their foreheads could rest easier. We had avenged them. But mixed with that satisfaction was a stain, a darkness I couldn't shake. Because the truth is, when Hathcock pulled that trigger, it wasn't just Apache who died. It was something in us too. Something human. As we prepared to move, Land finally whispered, almost to himself, "It's done." Hathcock only nodded, his face unreadable, his rifle still resting against his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. He looked like stone, but I wondered if he felt it too, that strange hollow ache. Walking back through the jungle, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. The sight of her falling, the stillness after. I thought about how fear had turned her into a legend, how her name had haunted us more than her bullets. And I realized that the legend had died there too, buried in the dirt beside her body. The monster was gone, but so was a piece of our own humanity. When we finally made it back to Hill 55, it felt as though the air itself had shifted. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the sandbags and bunkers. But for the first time in weeks, the shadows didn't seem to carry teeth. The moment the news spread, Apache was dead, the camp erupted. Men who had been walking like ghosts suddenly came alive. Laughter broke out, sharp and almost hysterical at first, as if no one could believe it. Helmets were slapped, shoulders were gripped tight, and some of the boys actually cried. Tough, sunburned Marines wiping their eyes like children. It was more than relief. It was like the weight of a mountain had been lifted from their chests. The boogeyman was gone. The invisible hand that had plucked men from the perimeter in the dead of night had been severed. For the first time, men looked up at the tree line without flinching. But I also saw something else. Behind the joy, behind the shouts and the shaky smiles, there lingered a shadow. Fear doesn't just vanish because its source is gone. It settles in the bones. It leaves fingerprints on the soul. Even as the Marines laughed and toasted with whatever they had, warm beer, bad coffee, I caught their eyes, and in those eyes was memory. I saw it in the youngest of them, boys barely old enough to shave. They smiled, yes, but the smiles never reached their eyes. Those eyes had seen too much. They had watched friends fall, heard screams ripped through the night, smelled death carried on jungle air. Now they knew that even victory didn't restore what was lost. I should have been celebrating too, and in a way I did. I laughed when the others laughed. I even drank the bitter coffee raised in shaky toasts. But deep inside, I felt the echo of that silence after the second shot, and I knew I would never forget. Hathcock didn't say much when we returned. He never did. He gave the report, confirmed the kill, and then he simply sat with his rifle, cleaning it with the same patience he carried everywhere. Land stayed by his side, quiet, the weight of command etched deeper into his face. They had done what needed doing, but they didn't gloat. They didn't need to. As night fell, the camp was different. Men slept a little easier. The jungle beyond the wire no longer seemed quite so close, quite so alive with menace. But no one slept deeply. Dreams still carried screams. Every sudden noise still made men sit bolt upright. The monster was gone, but the scars she had left ran deep. Even now, after all these years, I can close my eyes and see those young faces by the firelight. Faces that had just been given hope again, faces that still bore the marks of fear. That's the thing about war. Victories don't heal. They just stop the bleeding for a while. Victory does not erase scars. It only makes them quieter. Coming home was supposed to be the end. That's what they told us anyway. The plane touched down, we stepped off into American soil, and the war was meant to stay behind, trapped in the jungles of Vietnam. But it never worked that way. You don't just leave ghosts in a place like that. They follow you. At first, I tried to slip back into life. Got a job, bought a used car, dated a little. People asked questions at first. What was it like? Was it really as bad as they said? But the answers never fit in their ears. After a while they stopped asking. And I stopped answering. But the nights didn't stop. The nights were the worst. I would wake soaked in sweat, hearing that scream again, Johnson's voice tearing through the jungle, or the echo of the second shot as Apache's body fell. Sometimes I'd see her face in the dark, not twisted with rage, not even cruel, just calm, the way she looked before Hathcock pulled the trigger. Those eyes never left me. Daylight gave me distractions. Work, chores, the clatter of daily life. But in the quiet it all came back. The smell of the damp earth, the crack of a rifle, the way shadows moved at the edge of vision. Hill 55 never let me go. I started meeting with other veterans, sitting in church basements or smoky bars, trading stories and voices too low for anyone else to hear. We all had our ghosts. Some men carried the faces of children they couldn't save. Others still smelled napalm when they closed their eyes. And some, like me, lived with the memory of a single enemy who had become more than human, who had turned into a legend. We never judged each other. How could we? Everyone came back carrying something different, but no one came back empty. We learned to laugh again, even to live again, but the war was always there, just behind the curtain. Now, so many years later, I still find myself staring at the night sky, listening for sounds that aren't there. I know Hathcock carried it too. We never talked about it, not directly, but I saw it in the way he moved, the way his silence deepened as the years went by. Maybe killing Apache gave us victory, but it didn't give us peace. That's the truth people don't want to hear. The war never ended when we came home. It just changed uniforms. It became memories, nightmares, scars. We all carried Vietnam home in different ways, but none of us came back empty. Looking back now, I understand that Apache was never the whole story. She was a part of it, yes, a terrifying part, one that haunted our nights and tested every ounce of courage we had left. But she was only one shadow in a forest full of darkness. The real monster was war itself. It wasn't just her bullets that killed men. It was the endless waiting, the mud that swallowed boots, the heat that boiled the mind, the sound of helicopters fading into silence. It was the way fear hollowed us out, made us older than our years, and turned boys into ghosts before they even died. Apache was the face of our terror, but the war was the engine that kept feeding it. I tell this story not to glorify what happened, but to remind those who never walked those jungles what it costs when nations choose war. We lost friends, brothers, pieces of ourselves that we will never recover. The victory we claimed in that moment, the fall of one woman, was small against the mountain of loss that towered over us. To the generations who came after us, I say this: listen carefully. Learn from us. Do not chase shadows into jungles you do not understand. Do not believe that courage makes war clean. War always leaves scars, on the land, on the soul, on the people who fight it, and on those who wait for them at home. If you remember anything from me, let it be this: the dead do not rest quietly, and neither do the living who carry their memories. That is the price. Now, decades later, my nights are quiet. No gunfire, no screams, no jungle pressing in from every side. Yet when I close my eyes, I am back on Hill 55. The mist clings to the ridge, the air is heavy, and somewhere in the darkness, a scream still tears through the night. The war ended on paper, but inside, it still fights every night. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment with your own memories, your own ghost. Like this video, pass it forward so we never forget. Because forgetting is the first step to repeating, and that is a mistake the world cannot afford again.